Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your consciousness transformation and ascension guide, an originator of a practice called Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. And it was funny because I honestly forgot it was Thursday. So in like I literally was up for a while this morning and I was like, oh wow, it's Thursday. I forgot it's the day for my podcast. And I don't know, it's just been a very interesting number of years, I guess, whatever. Anyhow, so I said, okay, so what's the topic for today? Because that's how I run this. And what was really funny is to look at my original post. It about posting it about today. I posted like an hour ago. I said, okay, well, what are we going to talk about today? Let's see what guidance tells us or whatever. And it was funny as I typed that and then I posted it. And then I was just like, wow, I'm just sort of like not getting anything. But then I started seeing stuff and it was interesting about, intuition versus ego. All right. Intuition is guidance, same difference. Also, things like, things that have happened recently or things that I've gone through. And it was funny as I was texting a friend of mine and then I got this, and I was like, God, I'm not even sure that, even though I'm getting the messages, by the way, and I did actually post what I was going to be talking about, I wasn't even sure about it. Not even sure. I didn't even see that because I was still letting it come in. And a friend of mine goes, well, why don't you talk about, guidance? And I was like, oh, wasn't that funny? I already did actually post about that. So what we're going to talk about today is that, and not just the basics. So I can go through the basics really quickly. I posted, actually, it was funny, as a Facebook friend of mine posted a great little chart that says intuition, ego, on each side to compare. And so I reposted that before, again, I was even conscious of what I was going to be talking about. Because that's a question I get a lot, right? So that's step one. But what's really important today is talking about beyond that, right? So I'll take 2 minutes and talk about the basics of guidance versus ego, which is surprisingly still a challenge in discernment for many, but that's why we're going to talk about the bigger, the higher level of that. So guidance is, all right, so here's the thing. Have you ever heard a voice? You're in a car, right? Or you're going someplace, or you're thinking about something, and you hear this, oh, we have to do this. We have to do this. We must do this now. And you feel oh, I've got it. And this compulsion, right? That is not higher guidance. It's actually ego, right? Because ego is driven by, and here's the thing. I always tell people to check in with this. Ego is the job of the ego has been to explore separation identity. And the energies and emotions that come from separation identity are fear, anxiety, anger, guilt, judgment, doubt, sorrow, shame, all that kind of stuff. All ego-based emotions. So if you are having guidance and chatter in your head, that's usually chatter is a key as well, that it's ego, that it's all based on all that stuff that's in that kind of emotion, right? And you get that emotion, with that. Chances are it's coming from the ego. When you have the guidance that just says, yeah, do this, and actually a real pull, like a whole body pull, do this, but not an emotion behind it, not like a fire kind of thing under your butt, that's going, oh, you have to do this, or you mustn't, or whatever. When it's that clear voice, that's the higher guidance. So that's why we talk about meditation so much, and getting into the habit of clearing out the chatter, no matter what that practice is the most important thing. Because when we clear out the chatter, we can hear that clear, concise voice of guidance, or whether it's a voice or not. Because now, there's this whole thing out there, which is interesting. Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen on Twitter and social media, whatever, about the realization that some of us see things and hear our, inner voice and stuff like that. And that there are some who actually don't have that inner voice, which is interesting because not at all, they have no inner voice talking to them, or they don't hear their voice in their head. And I'm just like, well, that would be fascinating to study because I've not yet come across somebody who really didn't have that. But I'm thinking, well, in a way, though some people are like, oh, that's terrible, whatever. I'm like, actually, I have a whole career based on teaching people how to get rid of that chatter voice. So, wow, they just start out not having it. And they actually have like a leg up in many cases in presence anyway. So, anyhow, that's all I'm going to spend on that part of it, because what's really important to get to is talking about the next level, right? Because we are changing so dramatically right now. There's so much that's going on that's causing us to doubt our own eyes, doubt our own ears. Excuse me, there's a yawn. Obviously, it's an on point kind of thing. But then we start fighting with ourselves, right? So we hear something or we understand something, and then we start to say, okay, because we have become so dependent on perceiving the world around us with our eyes and ears, with our five senses, right? With the eyes, the taste, the sight, the sound, the touch, the smell. And we have created these physical bodies to be so very immersed in those senses, right? And so we make a lot of our judgments and decisions based on those things, right? And we have created in this whole creation, this whole level of consciousness, these sets of dimensions here on Earth, where we make judgments based on all those five senses that are based in our physical body, right? So that's what it was set up to do, because separation identity and physicality and density, and what does that do? And separation is what creates all the senses and sense in many ways. So we're so used to that whole, like, our entire existence management is through the five senses, that we've even taken what's natural to us, like our higher guidance, right? Our higher consciousness. And we we cut ourselves off from it to some degree, like actually a lot more in the past than we are now, in embodying here, this piece of our consciousness embodying here, that we put all the weight of everything we judge and discern based on those five senses, right? So we even call what we call supernatural abilities, intuition abilities, we call them, based on, so clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, like all of that's based on the five senses that we have here and our physical bodies in separation, as not the whole self, right? So then we're just creating more separation. The key is to step away as we become more conscious, and step away and allow ourselves to flow back into that wholeness of the whole consciousness of our soul, of our collective, of the divine consciousness, however big you want to go. And when we do that, these physical senses become less important, except for the messages that are coming to us here at this level of consciousness within this physicality of creation. So what happens is, what's going on is, it's time for us to stop making our decisions based on what we see and what we hear and what we smell. Stop making, depending the whole decision based on those things, and listening to our inner guidance first. Now, here's the thing. Our physical senses still give us the clues of the messages that we have here around us. And that even includes stuff that's in the non-physical. So, for example, there are certain facets to the divine. So some people call them guides, right? Yes. Some people call them guides. And whatever. I just call them facets of the divine, other facets of ourselves, coming to give us a message in a particular energy so that we can get the message in the way we were intended to get it, or we intend to give it to ourselves. But I'll get a certain scent with that when a certain facet comes in, with a certain face or guide or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes a physical feel of when I'm I don't want to use the word overwhelmed, when I'm overtaken, overwhelmed, whatever, with a big, important remembrance of something that's come in, right? My whole body will go sort of electric, right? Because, and that's the allowing higher consciousness to come in and shift and shifting the physicality of our bodies to allow ourselves to accommodate that, so that then it feels different, and we have these weird, what we call weird, different like experiences. So, why am I talking about all this? The thing that's important is that my understanding, and it has been so for a while, is to stop depending on my physical senses to get my guidance. So it was simply to make the focus of my consciousness to go within, right? To really quiet the chatter, quiet the ego voice, quiet the physical senses, to a place of listening, to just not listening. It's not even listening. Like, so it's funny that we even use words based on what? The five senses, right? But it's really a knowing, remembering, and letting myself remember bigger picture stuff consciously. So what's really important is that a lot of times, more so now than ever, hey Ann, now so more than ever, we get guidance that makes no sense in the physicality of this earth at all. Okay? And it has to do with all these other layers of consciousness that we're allowing to come together. So when we get this kind of guidance, it makes no sense. So we train ourselves. So what we're doing right now is retraining ourselves, rehabitualizing ourselves to listen to guidance that doesn't make sense based on the five senses, based on the reflection of the five senses. So how do we do that? For years I've been doing that with myself, right? So I get guidance that makes no sense in the physical, or it's different than what it was 10 minutes ago. So the key is, to learn to quiet the chatter, to discern between the ego voice and the inner voice. And those of us, by the way, who've been doing this consciously for a long time, it's still important for us. Good morning, David. It's still important for us to check in on a regular basis and really look at, is this truly guidance? Is my ego translating? Now that's another big one, right? Is that a lot of times we get guidance and we see it, and then the ego starts to, from that separation perspective, starts to translate it. And then it starts to change its meaning. And this is a big thing. So these are the next level things of guidance for us is, okay, if I don't translate this to what my ego wants to put words to, right? What does it feel like? What do I know? And sometimes, like this morning, I had no idea consciously of what it was I was going to talk about. But guidance was just there. And I even typed, let's see where guidance takes us. Well, it's funny because I was like, that was a great play on words. But I wasn't even conscious of what I was doing when I typed it. And it came in after, in conversation and texting and like stuff I saw up there, right? So, you're welcome, David. So the thing is, like, as we're shifting so much now, right? So our physical world is literally changing. Like, physicality is changing as we watch it. And we're changed in our remembrance. And in our remembrance, as we watch physicality, if you look at quantum physics, we change it. And we're changing it anyway. So if we're changing the physicality, then it's really important for us to start listening to guidance in a different way and beyond those five senses, beyond depending on those five senses. So the training for ourselves is trusting that guidance beyond what the mind is thinking, right? With the mind, aka the ego, is saying, does that make sense? Right? So if you say to yourself, does that make sense? That's from the ego, right? And the mind. Because, and like I said, I have these interesting things of pushing. So one of the things for me, and it's something I haven't talked about a lot, but I'm actually writing a book right now, so I'm going to be talking about a lot of this stuff a lot more publicly, because I think we all need to really share this kind of inner stuff. So to get where I've gotten to today, quantum physics, you're speaking my language. Yeah, it's great stuff. It's great stuff. Well, it's great. We've created a science that actually explains the stuff we already know, but it actually expands on like where the sciences have been, which is great. So, and I love quantum physics. It's fascinating stuff. I've been actually consciously looking at that a lot lately. But anyway, so getting to a place of, say, mastering, what we call mastering, say, changing things, right? Creation. And creation includes what we call healing, but really it's just shifting ourselves into a different space, because the dis-ease or injury or whatever is a message to ourselves too. So when we accept a message and say, I don't need to have it anymore, I can just shift it out of my body. And so people say, oh, that's so easy to say. And it's like, yeah, except that I had to retrain myself and rehabilitate myself over years on doing that as well. And guidance was really brutal on me. Like, no, do this. Like, it was do this. And it was very strong. And it was like, okay. And I would want to, and the ego would be like, oh no. I had a situation one time where I got a really bad case of poison ivy. And there was like a really deep thing for me to shift with that. But my guidance was, don't nothing. Don't use anything. Nothing external to you. Simply shift this yourself. And that was actually one of the biggest lessons that I had. I mean, I was like, oh no. And it was funny because I had others around me going, oh, you're crazy. Take this, take Benadryl, do this, da, da, da. And I was like, yeah, nope. And it was pretty bad. It was a pretty intense case. So, and I did. It took me several days, and I did shift through it pretty easily once. I mean, at the time it didn't feel like easily, but after that I found that I could change things so much more masterfully within my body, because it was just the process of how to allow it to shift, right? So that was guidance over what the mind would say, right? Then I had a lot of little physical things over the years, and less and less, because I've committed to my guidance to be able to know and remember without needing it to translate into my body as a message. And only when I'm really ignoring the message and of the remembrance do I actually would create anything in my body. So I've had one thing that's been sitting in my, it was very difficult for me to discern between ego and higher knowledge. Yeah, it's something we're very out of practice of when we're embodied. So like now, because we have so much coming in, then the ego wants to grasp onto it and translate it and then make judgment from it on, oh, what this is supposed to be. Yeah, once I accepted my walk, it became easier. Right. When you just accept, okay, I have the answer, right? Then it becomes so much easier, really. But it's like getting through all the self-judgments and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, so I get all these different guidances, right? So like something even recently, I had one thing. I had this one tooth, right? And this is going to sound really, really practically 3D, right? It is. But these are things that we do almost like this whole 3D is a practice field to remembrance through the separation and then allowing the separation to go away, right? Remembering that separation is just illusion anyway. But so I had this one tooth, right? And it was funny because a friend of mine reminded me of this when I was texting her this morning. That I had a crown. So I've had a crown on this one tooth, and I had this series of things that happened over the years with this crown, and I developed like what they call a fistula on my gum. It was like a little zit on the gum, right? That would come every once in a while, and I would pop it like a zit, like a sort of pus. But so it was something that happened with the crown, and that I'm not even going to go into that whole story. But I had that for like 5 or 6 years, and the dentist that I was going to was hounding me like incessantly to get a root canal, and I was like, yeah, no. I'm getting no. Now, the funny thing is, so a lot of us who are into holistic health will say, oh, well, root canals are terrible for you. And da, da, da. That wasn't really the reason I was making that decision. The decision was, my guidance was, nah, not necessary. Obviously, there was stuff I had to work out. So, again, it was something that I was to manage on my own without using something external to me to really, change it. So I worked on it for a long period of time. Whatever. And yeah, I was getting some stuff on the x-rays. There was like some stuff underneath the roots. And so he was pressing, but it wasn't like really big. Well, I didn't have any pain because I was managing it myself. And, I was getting harassed by my dentist and whatever. I changed dentists literally because it got so bad. And went to this other dentist and said, so, what do you think I should do? Or what's your perception? What's your perspective on what to do with this? Should I get it pulled? Should I whatever? Obviously, I don't want it to get any more inflamed. And not that I'd stopped believing that I could change it, but my guidance was to ask. So I did, to change dentists. So I did. And what was interesting was, in the conversation I had with the dentist, he said to me, okay, so I always tell my patients to listen to their own guidance, which right, I was like, oh, obviously I'm coming to the right guy because this is me talking to my clients, which is me talking to me, right? So he's like, so if it were me though, okay, I'm going to tell you, if it were me and I had this, I would probably go get the root canal, because I had two root canals that are really old from way before I had consciousness of all this kind of stuff. Because you had them like years ago and have never had any problems. I'm like, you're right, I haven't. And he goes, so I would probably just do that because then it won't spread anymore. And he goes, and chances are it'll go really well, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we had that conversation. And yeah, I took that into consideration, but that was not my answer. My answer was going into my guidance. And it was great that he said, I always tell my patients to listen to their own guidance on stuff. And I was like, that's awesome. Because it's important for all of us to do that more and more. So I did. I went home and I asked, and even though I've been getting no about that root canal for years, I finally got, yeah, go ahead, do it. Okay. There was no judgment on it. And then what was funny was other people that I know who are really like holistically minded and stuff, as I generally am, were like, oh, but root canals are terrible and whatever. And it's like, but that's a judgment, right? And yes, we have evidence and all this kind of stuff, but guidance was go ahead and do it, right? And I feel like it was, you know what, you have other things to put your energy to, and you've managed this fine, right? And apparently I got what I needed out of it. And it was like, okay, go do it. So I was like, all right, so I'll set that up. And I'll set it up to be painless and easy and quick. And the funniest part was when my friend was texting me this morning, and when we were texting each other, and I was saying, well, maybe I should talk. Yeah, and she said, we were talking about she was talking about discerning higher guides. Maybe you should talk about that. The third wave of the message came to me, right? And I was like, and she said something about like your crown. And I was thinking my crown chakra, and I'm looking at it going, what? Like, I'm confused. What are you talking about? And she goes, your root canal? And then she goes, and she was like laughing in the text, and she's like, so it was that much of a non-issue? And I'm like, actually it was. I had it this Monday. Okay. I had the root canal this Monday. They didn't have to replace the crown. They drilled through the crown. They did the root canal. They closed it back up. I had pretty much no pain. I had one moment where I bit down on a potato chip that night, and because I had forgotten I had a root canal that day, and it was a little sore. And that was it. I had steak the next day, right? So it was like, and so the thing is, yeah, it was a complete non-event. No pain, no soreness. It was basically, the guidance was, do this, it'll be fine. And now I don't have to put any energy to him managing it anymore or whatever. And yes, we can change things permanently. And do I understand consciously why I didn't change that permanently? On my own? No. But if my guidance was go ahead and do this because it'll take care of it and you don't have to think about it anymore, great. Wonderful. I have other things to put my energy to. So that's the whole thing. When we get sometimes we get guidance one way and then it changes. Well, then we fight it, right? Setting it up, thin slicing. David, I'm not sure what you're asking about thin slicing. Anyway, so, like a lot of times, and that's a very, like I said, a very physical thing. But then I get things like, work with this person, talk to this person, be with this person, do this. I've had guidance of like, just go and sit here. Like I one day was riding by something, and I was like, I had a pretty tight schedule that day, and I basically was riding by some place that I heard very loudly, stop here and go inside. Okay. And I have enough trust when I hear that voice. I was like, okay, so I went inside, and it was like a crepe place or whatever, and I just all right, I'll just order something small. It was lunchtime. And I sat there, and I was like, I have no idea why I'm sitting here. And it was just like, well, all I felt like, was important was to be, in pureness of, I guess for lack of a better word, my light or my vibration. and to just sort of, expand that. And at one point I just realized there was a woman that was sitting about 7 o'clock to me, and I could feel her energy was really, really heavy. And I think that's why I was asked to stop, or whatever the guidance was. And so I did. And then it was like I did it. And then it was like I was sitting there, and I was just like, okay, is it time to go now? And it was like, yes. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go. So I had that. There are things that we're guided to do that are going to make less and less sense. There are things that I've been guided to that the ego was terrified to do, but my guidance said do it, and so I trusted and did it, and it always worked out for a bigger picture thing. And sometimes, actually most of the time later on, I understand the bigger picture. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just trust. Sometimes I'm just guided to trust and know that I'm filling my note in the symphony, the interactive symphony that we have in this multidimensional universe. Thin slices is being able to know something will happen. Quantumly changing reality in small spots and slices is exactly what you know. Do exactly what I know. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's, I was just looking about the thin slicing thing. It's a quantum physics thing. So, yeah, and so when we remember that we are the creators of our realities, when we realize that we're all part of this one divine consciousness or wholeness, or whatever you want to call it. You want to call it God, source, you want to call it the universe, the multiverse, you want to call it all that is, creator. That's what we all are. We're all pieces of that. Like this here is an embodiment, as part of that whole consciousness. And so as the creators, we create these realities for whatever lessons that we choose, right? Or whatever we want to create. And that's why we're perfect, right? And in that perfection, we have that confidence to say, I know what I'm here to do, right? Even if I don't consciously remember it. And therefore, when the guidance comes in to do or be something, then that's what I'm going to trust, because I know that will bring me to existing in my bliss, which is our natural state. And these are things for us to, I know Facebook has a major lag in comments. So I even have my phone up here and it's still a lag. I'm very aware. So anyhow, so part of one of the biggest steps in this whole consciousness thing, no matter what avenue you're taking in it, right? Whether it's the quantum physics thing or the complete mystical thing or divine consciousness thing, it doesn't even matter the terminology, because it's all the same stuff. The key is to listen to what we already know. And listening, again, it's a word that's based on the five senses that's here, but it's realizing and remembering what we already know, allowing it to come to the conscious remembrance so that we can, all of our doing comes from that being. And it stops being guidance and it just starts being our being. And the funny thing is, the more we have, so it's funny, I'm so used to having these conversations, and literally I talk about this stuff every day with all the people in my circle, including my husband and my kids and my friends and stuff like that. And so it's interesting when I have a conversation with somebody who is still just from a perspective, from a different level of separation, right? I'm still seeing things in that perspective, and it's like, it's interesting because then it's like, wow, it's like it's just interesting to see how you see it as this little ball versus this big, huge, holograph. And so we talk more and more about this because we are expanding our remembrance, and as we do that, we touch ourselves. It sounds really funny. In meeting each other in this vibration, right? We're meeting ourselves. And then we're sort of recombining the remembrance. And then it becomes so natural. Cellular listening. Oh, I love that, Sarah. Cellular listening. Yes. It becomes a much different level of consciousness. And then we can talk, we cannot talk. It doesn't even matter. There are so many times that even in my household, and like my husband or whatever, like I'll literally think something and he'll pick up and say like the second half of a thought that I just had, or just this consciousness or this discussion. And it's so much easier because then there's no effort, right? So we put so much effort to the thought of, having to do something, right? In terms of developing our intuition. And really what's important for us to do is to stop doing and to be more, right? And that's really profound if you think about it. It's because we do all this stuff. We have to read and we have to learn and we have to practice and da 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 da, all this doing. When we stop doing and we turn inside and we listen and pay attention to remember and we allow that to blossom through. I mean, there's a lot of, and I know I make it sound really simple because we're out of the habit embodied here, this part of our consciousness, that to do all this, to do and do and do and do and do, right? So we are rehabitualizing ourselves, retraining ourselves. We're letting go of all of these levels. Yesterday I was in a session with somebody and I said it was like all these layers of blankets that that they were carrying, right? And it was like, oh, well, then what happens when you walk into a 100-degree room and you still have to carry all these blankets? But that's sort of where many of us are, in the process. And then it's like, it's just taking off the blankets and just being, this breath of freedom and wholeness, knowing that the blankets are nothing but really the burdens that we're carrying forward from the past that just don't exist in this present unless we choose to bring them here. So the more we unburden ourselves with that, the more we become present, the more we can listen to that guidance and know it and remember it and be from it. And then all of our doing shifts to coming from that being versus we do to be, then we're doing from being. And so that's why this whole next level of listening to guidance, of knowing guidance, of referring to it differently, and to being just our knowing and trusting. It's funny because eventually it just becomes so second nature. Then, like this morning, I was like, well, I don't even know what I'm talking about. Of course you do. Well, what? And then there's just nothing. But I'm getting the messages that are coming, and I always laugh at that. And I always actually have my little radar up going, okay, do. So give me the externalization if it's not coming in, because the thing was that inside it was, you just already know. Just get on and talk about this. So this week, what's really important is to start looking at how and if you are listening, right? And if you get guidance that doesn't make logical sense, check in to make sure it's guidance and not ego, because the ego is going to say, oh no, you got to listen to me, because this is when you hear in your head, this doesn't make sense, this makes more sense. That's ego, because it's ego trying to define, right? So it's like, okay, so is this guidance or is this ego? Is this guidance or is this ego? And that start getting yourself into, and there's a chart that I posted that was a great little intuition versus ego. It's a great little start. But like I was saying, that whole thing about that separation-based energies and emotions, that's your biggest guidance. That's your biggest guide as to whether it's ego or not. Because if you're getting this anger or this judgment or, I have to do this, or this righteousness, or I have to do this because of this, or I can't do this because of this, that's all ego, right? And so listen to the higher guidance. And the more we do that, the more we know it and trust it, the more it is going to, okay, I'm going to tell you, and this sort of ties into the quantum physics thing too, is because it all ties in together anyway. The more we act from that being of trusting our knowledge and our knowing and our wholeness, right, and our divine consciousness, the more we trust that we know that guidance, when that guidance comes in, the more we trust the guidance, even if it makes no physical sense to the mind and the surroundings of where we are in the physical world, the more we trust that and act from that being and trusting, the faster we evolve this level of consciousness. And that's what we're all doing. That's what we're all here to do. Because when we stop believing and translating and defining based on what we see and feel and smell and taste and touch, right? And we instead make our decisions from our knowing, then this whole reality starts to melt away, and we create this other one that's based in a much different form. And that's where we're going. That's our goal. So, all right. So, little baby steps for this week. That's it. So, thanks for joining me. Have a great week. You know what? Anne says, where's the chart posted for ego versus guidance? It's actually on my homepage, but I'll also post it under this too because it was a really nice little chart. But thank you guys for joining me for this week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off on this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.